Psalm 77, to the chief magician, to Jeduthun, a psalm of Asaph. I cried unto God with my voice, even unto God with my voice, and he gave ear unto me. In the day of my trouble I sought the Lord, my soul ran in the night, and ceased not, my soul refused to be comforted. I remembered God and was troubled, I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed. Selah. Thou holdest mine eyes waking, I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I have considered days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I commune with mine own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. Will the Lord cast off forever? And will he be favorable no more? Is his mercy clean gone forever? Doth his promise fail forevermore? Hath God forgotten to be gracious? Hath he in anger shut up his tender mercies? Selah. And I said, This is my infirmity, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember thy wonders of old. I will meditate also of thy work, and talk of thy doings. Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? Thou art the God that doeth wonders. Thou hast declared thy strength among the people. Thou hast with thine arm redeemed thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. Selah. The waters saw thee, O God, the waters saw thee. They were afraid. The depths also were troubled. The clouds poured out water. The sky sent out a sound. Thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of thy thunder was in the heaven. The lightnings lighted the world. The earth trembled and shook. Thy way is in the sea, and thy path in the great waters, and thy footsteps are not known. Thou leddest thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this passage here, Lord. I just pray that you'll help us to understand the importance of even those times of trial and tribulation and concern where we feel that you've cast us off and that there's no mercy for us, and that there's that when we call out to you that we don't get the answer that we want, and we feel neglected. Lord, I just pray that you'll help us to understand the importance to realize that even in those neglected times, you're with us, and that you care about us, and that you're working things out for your glory and for our redemption. Lord, I pray that you'll help us to understand this important passage. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, Psalm 77. It says, to the chief magician, to Jeduthun, a psalm of Asaph. And so Jeduthun is basically, you know how Asaph was this chief magician and so forth, and then you have Jeduthun, who was another magician in the temple. And so Asaph, kind of like how David would write psalms and songs for Asaph to sing and to present in the temple, so too did Asaph present some things for Jeduthun to sing and to present on his behalf as well. So they would sing these, or they would speak these out with, you know how sometimes people would quote a poem with music in the background or something like that, where they wouldn't sing it, but they would kind of like speak it, sort of like that as well. And so in those things, and so when they're all playing the music, he would be speaking this, and as a testimony, kind of like a testimony style. And he says, I cried unto God with my voice, even unto God with my voice, and he gave ear unto me. So in the psalm, we have is starting out that he called unto God with his voice. He spoke vocally, he spoke verbally. It wasn't just kind of like, every once in a while we, like when we're by ourselves, we pray in our head, thank you for this food, and we just move on with our day and so forth. But rather, this is kind of where he was up at night, he was disturbed, he was perturbed, and he basically, instead of just saying a silent prayer, he actually called out, he spoke out verbally, and he says, and then God would, he says it twice, I cried out to God with my voice. You know, sometimes we think, oh yeah, we cried out to God with our inner voice, but he's like, no, I cried out unto God with my actual voice. So he repeats it twice to show his actual voice that he spoke out. He verbally spoke out, and he gave ear unto me. And so when the psalm starts out with I cried out to him, and he gave ear to me. So it's not really one of those psalms where you're crying out to God and you don't really receive an answer. And so a lot of times you have those prayers where you cry out to God, but you feel like you don't get an answer. This is a prayer where he does get an answer, but it's not the answer that he wants. It's not the answer that comforts him. It's not the answer that he wanted to have. He wanted to have, a comfort, a mercy, a release, or something. But basically, God says, no, that's not for you right now. You can't have that comfort. He says, in the day of my trouble. See, he's in trouble. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He needs help. And God heard him, and yet God did not release him from that trouble. He did not save them from that trouble. He says, in the day of my trouble I sought the Lord. So he called out to the Lord. The Lord heard him in his day of his trouble. My soul ran in the night and ceased not. My soul refused to be comforted. So his soul, he says, my soul ran into the night and ceased not, and my soul refused to be comforted. So he has a wound to his soul, almost kind of like a hurt soul. It's not like a physical wound. How oftentimes you have a wound, you're hiding, and, I don't know if you ever hid from the cops with a gunshot wound or something. So hopefully not. But basically, how you would have, if you were injured or something, and then you needed help, and that pain from that injury, just think of that not on your body, but in your soul, that pain, that injury. If you ever broke an arm or something, you would feel that pain, and it just doesn't go away. I mean, it's like, oh, my arm's broken. You can't really just pull it back in the joint and then have done with the pain. It's a long pain that stays with you. It says, and it ceased not, my soul refused to be comforted. And so even though God heard him and he got a reply, it wasn't comfortable to him. Sometimes when you get an answer, it's comfortable, but then here, his soul refused to be comforted. And so he says he says, I remembered God and was troubled. I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed. He realized that the thing that he called out to God, hoping to get relief, and God answers him and hears him, but no relief. And then he's like, that's not fair. I called on you. Why can't I get a yes answer? Why can't you be my magic genie? Why can't you just give me the answer to my prayer in the way that I want it when I want it? And so here in this passage, not about trying to get the ear of the Lord or to hear his petition. He heard it, and God considered it, and he gave an answer, but it was not a comfortable answer. And he remembered God. He remembered what God told him. God informed him that you have to go through this. And it's similar to where, kind of like Jeremiah, for example, he was called by God, and he was told, hey, you're going to be my prophet. You're going to be my witness. You're going to have this big ministry in Israel. And then it's kind of like a person who's called to ministry in the United States or something. All right, I'm going to get this big church. I'm going to do all these things. We're going to do all these wonderful things for God. And then God says, no, hold on a second. You're not going to do wonderful things for me. Nobody's going to listen to you. Nobody's going to attend your meetings. Nobody's going to do anything, and you have to go out to them and do all these crazy things. You have to go over them. You have to write them letters. You have to get in their face. You have to go and do all these things, and you have to write a letter to. You have to write a book of my prophecies to the king, and the king's going to rip that thing up. You're going to have to write him another one. And then the king's going to say, hey, I want to put you in prison, Jeremiah, and so you're going to have to get Barak, to your assistant, to help you and to send these letters, and you're going to put him in danger, and then you're going to have a lot of pain, and there are going to be times when you're going to be like, I don't want to say anything, but you will have to say something, and then eventually you're going to live a miserable life. That's not a comfortable thing. I heard from God. I have this relationship with God, and I have this office from the Lord, but then what he tells me is not something that anybody wants to go through. And you would be like, hey, God, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go through that. No, it's easy to follow the Lord when you have one of those fun things to do, if you will, when you have an easy opportunity to do, and God's given you a great ministry or a great opportunity, but it's hard to follow the Lord when God says, hey, you know, I need somebody in this office, this position, this life, this process, this trial. I need somebody to go through there to be a witness for me, and you're that person, and you're going to have to endure a lot of things that you're not going to like. And you're going to be in a lot of trouble, and you're going to feel like there's no comfort for you. You're going to have to go through it. And so that's kind of like what he remembers this. He remembers, hey, the sore or whatever it is, this trouble that he's going through, God basically says, hey, this is for you right now. You don't know why, you don't know how come, but this is for you. This is what you have to go through. And so in the greater context of these verses, we've talked about how that, we looked at the wicked person, and we're like, why does God allow this? We looked at the church, and why does God allow this corruption in the church? And then we look at our own lives, and then we ask God, why do you allow such troubles to trouble me? Why do you allow such things to come into my life and to bother me? Why can't I live this godly, happy Christian life and health, wealth, and prosperity? And God wants me to be healthy, wealthy, and wise, and have this wonderful life and the Rolls Royce and everything. As long as I do all the good deeds, then I'll get all the great, wonderful benefits of life. No, that is not the Christian life, and a lot of times that God calls the faithful Christian to go through a lot of struggle and tribulation. And he says, I remember God, in verse 3, and I was troubled, I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed. You see, there's going to be times when you're going to have to do some things that you feel overwhelmed in. You won't be able to, you don't know how you're going to get through them. You don't know how you're going to live the life. And even the thought that God is with you going through it is not a comfort. Because you know you have to go through it anyway. And so there will be things like that. And for an example, I'll take an example from Paul's life, 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Everybody knows the thorn in his flesh, where he sought the Lord thrice, but the Lord would not remove it from him. The Lord would not remove it from him in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. So we think of Paul, or the special miracles that God did, especially when he was, especially last week when we talked about how that the special miracles God wrought through his body, from the aprons and from the handkerchiefs and things, and yet this infirmity in his flesh was still to be there. 2 Corinthians 12, verses 7 through 10 says, verse 7, and lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. So here in Paul's life, he's been given this great ministry, this great opportunity to be the apostle to the Gentiles, the apostle missionary, the missionary who was to be a great influence in his letters to the churches and in his ministry, and to be able to do such great works for the Lord. And he was also revealed to him a lot of revelation, a lot of mysteries, like the mystery of the church and the mystery of the rapture, and the mystery of a lot of different mysteries in the scriptures that Paul was revealed to by God. Now they were in the scriptures, but until God revealed it to him, all the pieces were not put together in these mysteries, and the final revelation was not presented, and the final understanding was not presented until Paul was able to was given inspiration by the Lord to write them down and to discern these mysteries that are in his letters that he presents. And a lot of times when somebody gets greater understanding of the scriptures, they start lifting themselves up higher. Well, you guys just don't know what I know. You guys don't know what I know about the Lord. I got this great relationship with the Lord. I got this great appointment of the Lord. I got all these wonderful things. And he says, hey, in order so I don't get lifted up above measure, to misunderstand where my place in life is as a servant of the Lord, as an apostle of the Lord, to think that I'm greater than I am, the Lord allowed this thorn in my flesh to continue, even though I'm able to heal others, even though I'm able to do all these things for other people, even though I'm able to reveal a lot of great revelation that was before time hidden. This messenger from Satan, this messenger of Satan, buffeted me, lest I should be exalted above measure. He's keeping them low, keeping them humble. And so we need to understand that there will be trials and times in our lives that we don't know why we're going through them. Sometimes it's because if we didn't go through them, we would be lifted up above measure, like Paul said he would have. Other times it may be that God is trying to temper our mettle, trying to make sure that if we can go through this process now, that later on we'll be able to help somebody else go through the same process, or the such like, or to be a comfort to somebody else later on down the road. But we don't know oftentimes why God has us go down a path. We don't know why he has us go down a trail, and oftentimes even knowing that God is there and having to go through the process is no fun. Paul besought the Lord. A lot of times people say, well, I just thank the Lord for everything that I have and everything that I get, even the painful things. So Paul sought the Lord 3 times to remove this thorn in the flesh, but God wouldn't remove it. There will be things that you'll go through your life, you'll cry out to the Lord and say, Lord, remove this from my life, and to have peace and safety through this, and he's not going to do it. He's going to say, no, you got to continue on. Just like in Paul's life here, to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. And this is what he said. Remember, he wasn't forsaken. It wasn't like, please, Lord, take this away from me. And then he beseeches the Lord thrice. And then the Lord says, and he said unto me, my grace is sufficient. I'm going to give you what you need for the trial. I'm not going to take away the trial. I'm going to give you what you need to go through, but I'm not going to take away the path. And a lot of times, for a lot of Christians, that's very difficult. We want a life of, especially in America, we want a life of ease and comfort. We don't want to be buffeted. We don't want to be persecuted. We don't want we want to live in quietness and peace. And in fact, Peter tells us to pray that our authorities leave us alone, so that we can live a quiet and peaceable life, and so that we can do all those things. And that's why, to the extent of us getting involved in government and politics, it's just so that we can be left alone to do God's will. It's not that we want to take over government, but that we want to be left alone to do God's will. And that's the extent of us getting involved in government, is to be able to do God's will. But there are times when he says, my grace is sufficient. Not the removal of it, but the giving of grace through it. And he says, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. So if there's no opportunity for me to show my strength, then what's the point? If there's no opportunity, if there's no point in your life where you find that you're too weak for a situation, that you can't endure a situation, that without me that you can't go through, and if I give you a life of ease, then where are you going to see my strength? If the Egyptians never oppressed the Israelites, where would be the need for them to depart from Egypt? They would stay there forever. Where would be the need for them to discover God? Where would be the need for them to call out to God for their rescue? Where would be their need to call out to God to save them from a life of immorality and a life of faithlessness? There would be none. And so rather than removing the oppression, rather than removing the situation, God is going to say, hey, no, the situation is for your good, so that you can find my strength in your weakness. Realizing that you are but a weak vessel. You realize that you are but a vapor that appeareth for a moment and then is gone. You need to realize your infirmity while here on this earth. Otherwise, if you have a life of ease, just like the wicked man who had the life of ease, lived his life in enjoyment, and then he goes to hell, and then that's the end of it. You see, the reason why he chastises you and allows you to go through these trials, and his determinate counsel says, hey, no, I could release that, but I'm going to let you go through it instead. Instead of releasing and removing that thing, I'm going to give you grace to go through, because that grace will show my strength. And so here in this passage he says, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore. He says, most gladly, therefore. So, while going through these trials, and oftentimes our reaction is in the flesh to be overwhelmed and cry and to pout and not be comforted. But Paul says, hey, because I realize this secret, in fact, this is kind of a mystery, even though it's not really a secret. It's something that if you search out the scriptures you'll find. But the secret of your trials in life is to give you grace, is to give you strength in the time of weakness. He says, because I realize this, that it's not going to ruin me, it's going to make me better, it's going to make me stronger, it's going to encourage me, it's going to make me realize and rely on God. He says, most gladly, therefore, I will rather glory in my infirmities. Realize there are areas in your life that you're weak and you're never going to get strong in. And instead of pouting about God not giving you that talent, or God not being able to use you in that way, and God not being able to do whatever you desire to do, but you're just too weak to do it in your own strength, just say, hey, I'm weak in that area because I'm supposed to be weak. Perhaps maybe God's going to, through the trial, make me stronger in that area, or perhaps even I'll never be strong in that area. But what I do know is that God will give me grace to go through that trial, that process. If I have to do something, even if I'm weak in that area, God will give me the grace to go through it. And so this is what we need to understand. It's not a bad thing to be weak in an area. It's not a bad thing. If you say, hey, I'm not the most eloquent person. When people talk to me, they don't think, oh, that's a really smart person. I'm going to agree with that person. And a lot of times people keep their fear from allowing them to witness to people in the gospel and to preach the gospel or go to door or whatever it is to a friend to give them the gospel, because they say, I don't know all the verses, I don't know all the numbers, I don't know all the I can't quote verses perfectly, I mess them up, I don't know if I know all the points all the way through. That all that stuff, even if you can do it, that's wonderful. But if you can't, that's fine, because all you need is to be a witness. He's going to take you, even if you don't know how to present the gospel, and you just say, hey, God did this for me, and He can do it for you. You just speaking that and somebody hearing that is an opportunity for God to use in His strength. Rudy told me this one time when he was just first starting out soul winning, is that he was so scared that he only had 4 verses, and he knocked on the door, would you like to hear the gospel? And the guy says, sure. And then he quotes the 4 verses, and then he asks them, do you believe this verse? And it's basically, he quotes the verse, and then the point, and this means we're all sinners. Do you believe you're a sinner? Yes. This verse says that God committed to love toward us while we were yet sinners. Christ died for us. Do you believe Christ died for you? And yes. And then this verse says that those who don't believe in Christ is going to hell. And then do you believe that you'll go to hell if you don't believe on Christ? Yeah, I believe that. And then the last verse, like, call upon the name of the Lord and thou shalt be saved. Do you believe that if you call now, you'll also be saved? And then the guy says, you know what? Nobody really told me all those things before. And I want to call on the Lord right now. I appreciate that. And then he's like, he was surprised because he didn't have all the arguments. He didn't have all the eloquent speeches. He just quoted the point in the verse and then asked them the question. And then at the end, the guy prayed unto the Lord and then got saved. And it wasn't because Rudy knew all these things. He said he wrote them down in his book. He was just reading them like this. It wasn't like he was being eloquent. He was just had his nose in the book, and then he's like, do you believe that? Do you believe that? And it was like everything that you would think not to do, he did, and then yet, because the guy was ready, because all he needed to do was to present, and the words of life came from his mouth, and the guy heard them, he was able to be used of God. His strength was made perfect in weakness. And so you need to understand that even though in your infirmities you have a fear, you have a discouragement, just going through the process, going through the trial, you'll see God's strength shine forth. And so we need to understand that we need to rejoice that we're weak in an area and that God can use us in spite of it. He says, most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may what? Rest upon me. We need to realize that we are the vessel that the power of Christ rests on. And all we do, if we cleanse ourselves and we make ourselves available to the power of Christ, then Christ will use us. Whatever trial we go through, whatever process we go through, whatever it may be, a time of discouragement, a time where you feel you're not strong in an area, whatever it may be, your times of trouble, just realize that God will give you the grace to go through it. Those infirmities that you have are the areas where God will shine greatest. If all you have to do is to go through it and to go out to the other end, even though we don't know the outcome. And sometimes you'll have a negative outcome, you'll have a positive outcome, but it's all for the grace of God. God's grace is sufficient for you to go through the trial. And so this is where he says, and my spirit was overwhelmed, so I had to stop and think about it. And so we're going to notice here that every section in this passage has a salah. There's like 4 sections, and each one's like a salah. Stop and think. A lot of times when you get overwhelmed in a situation, you don't know what's going to happen. You hear an answer from God. You say, hey, you're not going to get the trial released from you, but you're going to go through it, but with me. And then and then you need to stop and say, okay, let me take a breath. Let me think about what's going on here. Let me understand my infirmity, and let me find out where God is going to use me. And so in this passage, he cried out unto the Lord. He didn't just try to run away from the situation. He sought the Lord to remove it, to seek comfort, but he wasn't comforted. He was overwhelmed, and there will be times you're overwhelmed. There's a lot of times where I'm overwhelmed. I get off work, really late on, on Saturday. I have to go or talk to people, on Saturday morning at soul winning, and sometimes, it's half asleep, and but I know God can help me go through it. To go on Sunday and talk to people and to pray and hope that God will grow His church and different things. And there's a lot of things put into doing the church and starting a church and so forth, and saying, hey, I can't do this. Hey, I made a mistake there, or I didn't do something right there. I made a wrong turn there. And a lot of times, there's prayer and things that go into it, and you're like, hey, this is where you have to go. You have to go through the process. And sometimes it's like overwhelming. Hey, I just want to quit and just go home and not do any of this stuff. But the thing is that God's strength is made perfect in our weaknesses. And so if we remember that and we stop and think about our situation, we will go through this. So he says, Salah, and then verse 4, Thou holdest mine eyes waking. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. His situation, his problem, and realizing that he's not going to have it removed, is making him stay up at night. It is upsetting him. It is making him worried. He's troubled about his trouble. He says, I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. So he's searching, he's trying to figure out, hey, what did God do in the past? Is there something there that could help me? Can I look back at my days at school? Can I look back at days of my life? Can I look back at history to find something that I can secure, to find something that I can latch on to and to consider? And this is always a good thing when you stop and think. Your spirit is overwhelmed. You search your mind. Thou holdest mine eyes waking. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song in the night. So he's trying to look at all those good things, trying to cheer himself up. He realized that, hey, the trial ahead is a very difficult one. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why I have to go through this problem, this situation. He says, but I'm trying to look back on my past and look back in my history, trying to find something to get a hold of. And then he also looks back in verse 6. He tries to look back in those times where he did have grace and did have comfort from the Lord and felt like the Lord was really close to him and that he was comforted by him, and saying, hey, I can have that once I go through this situation. It's not like God has forsaken me. It's just the trial of the time feels that way. He's calling to remembrance. When you're overwhelmed in your spirit, you need to stop and think, and if you can't sleep, meditate on those things that trouble you, and consider what God has done in the past for you. Consider what God has done in the past for Christians in general. Consider people that have gone through the trials that you've gone through. There's nothing new under the sun. There's the things that you're going through, somebody else has gone through, and you can look back on their time, look back on their history, ask how did they deal with this? How did they go through this situation? And then also think about the good times. Think about the times that God really did come through for you. Think about the times that you were able to sing it in the night rather than being troubled and struggling in your sleep and can't sleep. Just think of those times where you were so joyful that you sung praises to God, that you rejoiced in God, and those victories that you've already had in your life. Realize that life is not just one big struggle. And at the present time, sometimes life seems like a struggle about the situation you may be in. But we need to remember back that God gave us victories over past struggles, and that God will give us victories over future struggles, and we just need to be firm in going through this current situation. He says, I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. Verse 6, I call to remembrance my song in the night. I commune with mine own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. So when you have the struggle and you feel overwhelmed, you need to talk to yourself, basically. You know, you've already heard from God. God's already said, you're not getting out of the situation. You're going to have grace for the situation, but you're not going to get out of it. And so you need to talk to yourself, commune with yourself, encourage yourself, and my spirit made diligent search. And so a lot of times people just they go off and have a pity party, and they don't stop and think. They just indulge in the sorrow, indulge in the depths of that sorrow, and then they allow it to take themselves from God. But because the spirit was overwhelmed, when a part of you gets overwhelmed, you need to flip over to another side. You need to flip over to your mind. You need to flip over to your soul. Because when the spirit gets overwhelmed and you can't think and you can't process and you're uncertain, you need to stop and think. Consider the things that you remember in the past and consider the days of old. Call to remembrance your songs in the night, and commune with your heart, because the heart is the seat of your spirit there, and with your heart, with your mind and your soul, you can commune one with another there. And my spirit made diligent search. Oftentimes how the Bible says that His Spirit can commune with our spirit, and even when we don't know how to commune to God and speak to God and to search out those things, if we just kind of stop and say, hey Lord, help me process these things, help my soul to process through these things and get me encouragement, then God's Spirit can commune with our spirit and help us in those situations. I call to remembrance the song of the night. I made diligent search. And then not only does he remember the times of the past, ancient times, how did other Christians deal with this? How did other godly people deal with this situation? How did God deal with these things in our past? He also remembers his times of victory. And then now he's going to ask himself questions. He's going to ask himself some rhetorical questions and see what the answers are, how he really feels about these things. Oftentimes our spirit says, oh, God's not there for me, He doesn't care about me, He doesn't want to remove the situation from me, and therefore I'm just going to pout here. And then you got to talk to yourself and you say, hold on, self, hold on, hey, ask me this, will the Lord cast off forever? Is this going to be your permanent situation in life? Is this trial that you're going through, is it going to last forever? Will the Lord cast off ever? Will He be favorable no more? Ask yourself these things. And then I'm sure if you remember the times of the past, your history, and the times of victory, and then remember all those things in your past, and then you ask these questions, you say, well, no, He's not going to cast off forever. This is just a temporary situation. Will He be favorable no more? No, this is just a temporary situation. And He's giving me grace to go through it. It's not like it's not my favorite thing to go through, but it's not like he's not there for me as I go through it. Verse 8, is his mercy clean gone forever? As I go through this, will I not receive mercy? Is he not there? Ask yourself these questions and base it on past victories and past Christian life, and realize, no, he's there. His mercy is there for me. His grace is sufficient. He has mercies for those areas that I can't persevere in. And cling God forever. Doth his promises fail forevermore? Doth his promise fail forevermore? Now, just because I'm going through this situation, does that mean that the things that he promised me are not going to happen? Does that mean that I'm not going to be able to find a place in my life for his promises, that this, on the other end of this, isn't my promise? Hath God forgotten to be gracious? No. His grace is sufficient for thee. It's with thee right now. And so we need to ask these questions. Ask and process and say, hey, is this true or is this not true? Ask these questions. Hath God forgotten to be gracious? Hath he in anger shut up his tender mercies? Now, this is a good question at this last one here. Hath he in anger? Sometimes we mess with the Lord. We don't do what's right. And we really need to ask ourselves, is this trial something that God's doing because because I'm his child and he cares about me and he's giving me grace through it and he's giving me mercy through it and on the other end will be his promises? Or is this something that I'm fabricating myself? You really need to, this question is really important because he says, because I'm angry at God or because I'm doing something wrong with God and I've treated him in the wrong way, has he become angry with me to where he shut up his tender mercies? In other words, for his child, tender mercies are there, the comforts are there, the things are there, but sometimes when we overwhelm our spirit, we get in a pity party in depths of sorrow, and we are faithless. See, oftentimes, here's the big problem with, especially the children of Israel when they got out of Egypt. It's not that God was unable to do something. In fact, the only thing that prevented him from doing something was their faithlessness. And so oftentimes when we're going through a trial, and we think that God can't do anything, he can't bring us through, oftentimes it makes him angry. It makes him upset that you don't trust in him. You don't believe that he can be there for him because your faithfulness will oftentimes shut up God's mercies. So you need to ask yourself and say, hey, make sure that even though I have to go through this situation, make sure it's not because of something that I'm doing on purpose to hinder the works of God in my life. And so he says at the end of this section, again, Salah. Think about these. Think about these questions. When you're going through a trial in life and process of life, these are some good questions to ask yourself, to go through. First remember those things that happened in the past with other Christians, same situations. Think about the victories God gave in your life. Ask these questions. Make sure that it's not just something that you're fabricating yourself, that you're preventing the Lord's mercies yourself. And then think about that. And then an answer to these would be, for us as Christians especially, Hebrews chapter 13, verses 5 through 6. So we looked at Paul, and now we look at Hebrews here. Hebrews chapter 13, we ask, is God there for us? Is his mercies there for us? Is his tender mercies available for us? Hebrews chapter 13 gives us an answer for these questions and this section. He says in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. Be content with the trials of your life. Be content going through them, realizing that God will help you in the situation, even though God has not removed it. Be like Paul and say, hey, his strength is made perfect in my weakness. I can go through them, therefore I will be there with content. Remember what Paul says, I found whether to be abounding or to be abased, to be there with content. And so he says, let your conversation be without covetousness. Don't try to get something in your situation when God's already replied to you, given you an answer. Don't be covetous in that. Even though your spirit is overwhelmed, use the process to go through and to clear your head. And be content with such things as you have, for he hath said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. When you answer those questions, Answer them with this verse. God says he'll never leave me. So how can his grace not be with me? How can his mercies not be with me? How can his tender mercies not be there? If I'm content with God, and that the situation on the other end will end up with will allow me to end up with his promises if I'm faithful, then he's not. If I'm faithful, he's certainly not going to leave me. He says, I will never leave you. He's not like saying, oh, through this trial I'll be gone, and on the other end I'll be back. No, he says, I'm going through it with you. He says, I will never leave thee. And he adds a little extra, nor forsake thee. So sometimes God will be there, but, oh, you're just watching. You're just getting a big laugh out of this, aren't you, God? You're watching me. You're there with me, but you don't care. No, he says, not only that, is I will not forsake you. In other words, if you're in trouble, I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you grace. I'm going to give you mercy, but you still have to go through it. So that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. He's making you go through the situation, but he's your helper, and I will not fear what man shall do unto me. So oftentimes we allow man to hinder the promises of God in our life and to shut up those mercies and to allow our faithlessness to anger God. But rather we need to be content with the Lord, be content with the situation we're going through, and realize that the Lord is going to help us, and we don't need to fear what man shall do unto me. He says, and so we need to understand that God will be there with us. He will give us strength for the time. He will give us the mercies. We don't need to worry about those things. God will never leave us or forsake us. Verse 10, he goes through this process. He's overwhelmed. He heard from God. He's overwhelmed. He realizes he has to go through the situation, and he doesn't know what's going to happen at the other end. But he says in verse 10, and he's looking at past history with other Christians. He's looking at his past victories. He's asking these questions, making sure that it's not any of problems with his own self. And then he said, this is my infirmity. The problems that I have right now are just because of my flesh. I'm struggling with faith. I need the Lord to help me in my faith. I need to process these situations. The fact that I'm not comforted, even though I know the answers from God, even though I don't know where to go from here, it's because I'm infirm. I'm weak. I don't have the strength in my own self to go through the situation. We need to realize that a lot of times this situation, we just need to acknowledge that's just who I am. That's just where I am in life. Says that attitude, that spirit, that struggle that I'm having with the will of God for my life is just who I am. It's not to disregard them and to say, oh yeah, I just need to buck up and put a smile on my face and to power through it. No, we just realize, hey, that's who you are. Those weaknesses are your weaknesses. Accept them. Realize that you're going to struggle with certain things. You're going to be infirm in certain things. You're going to be weak in certain things. You just have to give it over to God and be content with what you're going through. Just realize, hey, I don't want to go through this situation. I don't like being in this situation, whatever it may be. I'm fearing man. I'm worried about what's going to happen. I don't know what's going on. And I want to control the situation. But I just need to realize that's just me. I just need to not necessarily forget it, but to deal with it, to go through the process, to when I get overwhelmed, realize that the spirit in me gets overwhelmed. Like the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. To realize that the infirmities of my flesh are going to always be there with me. But I need to remember, whenever you get overwhelmed in the spirit or overwhelmed in your flesh, you just need to stop. You need to think, to have a little Selah moment, and to process through your memory and to remember. He says, this is my infirmity. This struggle with the will of God in my life. But through that infirmity, I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. The years of the right hand of the Most High. And when we think about the right hand of the Most High, we think of power, we think of strength, we think of those things where God was able to be strong in my life. As a Christian, we think of those times when God came and saved us, when God visited us, when God was able to rescue us from a situation, when God was able to help us. That spiritual life, washing us and cleansing us from sin, our past life, and remembering those things that God has done for you already. I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the works of the Lord. So, even though he's infirm, and you need to realize that you're going to be going through this process, and sometimes you'll go through trials, and that trial will be over, and you're like, yay, the victory! And then you're going through another trial, and rather than being encouraged, the same attitude pops up. You know, oh, this again. No, I don't want to go through this again. Or it feels like you think you've gotten a victory over a certain spirit or an attitude or a part of your flesh, and then it pops up again. You say, oh, I thought I got victory over this. No, just realize that that's always going to need to be disciplined. That's always going to need to be dealt with. And for every person, there's going to be struggles and infirmities that are going to be unique to that individual. And they'll never get victory over them. They'll just have to, every time they come up, to remember the process, to remember how they got victory over it the last time, to remember how they can have contentment through it. He says, this is my infirmity, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember thy wonders of old. So he's remembering, bringing to remembrance. I will meditate. So the first thing he's doing, he's remembering those things we just talked about. And I will meditate also of thy work and talk of thy doings. So the process in order to calm your spirit and to go through it is kind of threefold. Remember what God has already done in your past life and with past lives of other Christians. And then the second part is to meditate also of all thy work. How did God work this out last time? How did God work this out in other people's lives? It's basically remembering that you can get through this. And the second part is getting instructions, going to the instruction manual to learn the steps of going through the trial. And this is kind of like where you have verses to encourage you to go through it. How did God handle this? And what should I do? How should I reply? How should I act in this situation? How can I get stronger in this situation? What are the verses that I can use to get at this? And so you remember, then you meditate on how-tos, and then you talk of thy doings. So he says, I'll remember the works of the Lord. Verse 12, I will meditate also of thy work. And then the second part of that verse, talk of thy doings. Don't keep silent. Talk about what God has done. Talk about it. Verbalize it. You call out to God with your voice. Use your voice to help process the situation. Sometimes just talking about things. Oftentimes that you have to be a sounding board. Sometimes you just need a listening ear to be able to hear something spoken. Oftentimes helps you process things better. Sometimes you are going through a trial, a tribulation, and you don't really need somebody to solve your problem. You just need somebody to vent to. You need somebody to speak out to. And so this process is to remember the things that God has done, remember how to do it, and then talk and tell people how it's going to be done, how God's going to win the victory through this. Speak as if He's already done it. Speak about how He's done it in the past. Tell others, this is how God's going to solve this situation. This is how God did it in the past. This is how He wants us to do it now. And this is how we will win the victory. So you go through that process. You work through that process. Even though you don't know the end result, you know how to get there. God has done this before. He's shown you how to do it in the Scriptures. This is how you go through it. He says, verse 13, Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? So he's telling you that even though you don't know the process you're going to go through, that trial is going to be there. It's going to be, even though you don't, like I said, so he says, Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. See, God's not leaving you with, this trial, you don't know how to go through it. You don't have any answers to it. You don't have any memory of how it happened in the past. You don't you don't have any how-tos to get through it. You can't speak about it. No, he's saying those things that you need to do to process it, when your spirit is overwhelmed, there's answers for you in the sanctuary. So remember this passage is about, remember we talked about how having trust in those blessings, how to get blessings from God, and then how to trust in the Lord. And now this book is about how to deal with situations throughout in the world and deal with those things. He says the answers you need, you'll find them in the sanctuary. How do I remember the histories? In the tabernacle in their times, they would have books. They would have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, and so forth. And as the history would go through Israel, as they would chronologue the things, and they would get the book, the 1st and 2nd Kings, they would get 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Esther, and so forth. And as they lived history, they would record the things that God did, God's wondrous works, so that when they went to church and they say, hey, I'm struggling with this situation or that situation, they would say, okay, look, in our history, back here, God dealt with this specific situation that you're dealing with, and this is how he dealt with it, and this is how he's commanded that we deal with it, and if you do that, you'll get victory through the situation. And they would go do that, and they would declare God's victory in the sanctuary. And then as these victories happened, they would record them. This is why journaling is always so good sometimes, especially when you're struggling with situations, is to chronologue the blessings that God has given to you in your life, how he dealt with them and so forth. And then when you have struggles, just read those journals back over, or a situation that you struggled with that can help with your current situation, and those bring victories. But here in this passage, we remember that the connection point between heaven and earth is the sanctuary, is that church, is the local church. And so when you are struggling with the situation, and you need to remember the times of old, you need to remember how to go through it, the answers are, first and foremost, with the Holy Spirit guiding you to all truth. And secondly, it is in the sanctuary, in heaven obviously, through the Holy Spirit. And then it is in the church, the local church house, where you have fellow believers that have gone through the same situations, have gone through the same struggles, have studied God's Word, and can help you go through those situations. And when you speak of it in the sanctuary, when you speak of those things in the church, then you are able to together be able to go through your situation and have answers for your spirit that is overwhelmed. Thou art the God that doest wonders, thou hast declared thy strength among thy people. It's not like God's never talked to us before. We need to realize that God's talked to us and been through with his people throughout all of life, and that there's answers for us, and we don't have to go it alone. Even though we know how we have to go through the trial, we can get answers from the church, and we can get answers from the scriptures, we can get answers from God, because he's spoken to us in very often. He says, thou hast with thine arm redeemed thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph, Salah. So now he wants us to think about this section where he's in infirmity, but he's remembering and he's meditating, and he is going to church, and he's going to the sanctuary, he's getting answers, he's looking at the great wonders, and he's saying, hey, I'm going to get those wonders for myself. You redeemed your people, and you're going to save me from the situation as well. We remember about the church here. It says, now thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25 would be a good one for us to remember as Christians. When we think, has God cast us off? Is God not with us? And then we need to remember that the church is there for us. The church where we can receive answers from. He says in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, husbands, love your wives even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. Realize that God loves you, Christ loves you, and he loves the church, and he's going to communicate with the people in this church. And he says he gave himself for it that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of the water by the word. He's going to give you answers to your problems and your situations and your struggles through the word, in the church through the word, that he might present it himself a glorious church. See, he's not forsaking you or leaving you. He's giving you strength. He's helping you, just like a husband would help his wife and so forth. And he says that he might present it himself a glorious church, He doesn't want you to be marred and tortured and all these things, but he's going through it for your victory. Having not spot nor wrinkle nor any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. So realize that God loves the church as he loves himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh. He doesn't hate his church. He doesn't hate you. He's not making you go through a situation because he hates you or he's angry with you. But nourish and cherisheth it. The process is for nourishing and cherishing, so that when you're in the church, you'll be nourished and cherished through the situation, even as the Lord of the church, for we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife. They two shall be one flesh. He's not going to forsake you, just like he has not forsaken the church. He says, this is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. And so we need to understand that his way is in the sanctuary. He is with the church. He is with his people. He is going to be with you through every process and situation. And so in this passage he says, thou hast with thine arm redeemed thy people. This is not a will eventually. This is a conclusion. This is a fact. And so forth. And so he makes this clear. And then he also points out, he says, thou hast declared, he says in verse 15, the sons of Jacob and of Joseph. So he points out the sons of Jacob, which of course that would be Israel proper, but then the sons of Joseph. And then those would be Joseph, remember, Ephraim and Manasseh are half Egyptian. They're not pure, quote unquote, pure blood, Jacobites or whatever. They are half Egyptian. They lived their life, they were never in Israel. They lived their life in Egypt, a picture of the world. But these two together shows that the sons of Jacob and of Joseph, and think about this, he wants us to think about this. He doesn't just say Jacob, he says, and Joseph. Those people who joined themselves with God's people, those people that sought the promised land, that sought for a city, those people that looked for the promised land. Not the unbelievers, but the faithful. Whether you're of Joseph, not pure Jacob, but you are connected there. He says, think about this. So it's talking about the people of faith. Thine arm hath redeemed thy people. And we understand that with these two connections here, the sons of Jacob and of Joseph is sons of faith through whether in the world or whether in his nation, they were saved by faith. They were redeemed by faith. And we can see this in Revelation chapter 5, verse 8 through 10, is the finished product. We need to realize that we have in Revelation the end of the story, the end of the road, if you will, the finished promise, if you will. In chapter 5, verse 8 through 10, it says, and when he hath taken the book, the four beasts and the 24 elders, the elders of the church in heaven, and fell down before the Lamb, having every one of them harps and golden vials full of the odors, which are the prayers of the saints. Remember, you started out this verse, Psalm 77, praying out to God with his voice. The prayers that Asaph prayed in this psalm are in these vials, if you think about it. The prayers of all the psalms, the prayers that you have prayed, are in these vials that the elders have. He says, and the vials full of odors, which are the prayers of the saints. He says, and they sung a new song, saying, thou art worthy to take the book, and to open the seals thereof, for thou wast slain, and hast redeemed us to God by the blood of every kindred, and tongue, and people, and nation, and hast made us unto our God kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth. And so we need to understand that while we don't know the path, while we don't know what's going on with the waves and the winds and the thunders and the lightnings and all those things, we can realize that we're being led by God, and on the other end is victory. And so even though we are scared in the infirmity of our flesh, we're struggling with these things that we're trying to process, we're overwhelmed in the spirit, the Egyptians are chasing us, the world is hindering us, and we're going through a place of danger where the waves could crash in at any moment. And yet God is leading us, and He has redeemed us. He has saved us by His right hand. It says, Thou hast with thine arm redeemed thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. Salah. Think about this. Think about the fact that God has redeemed all flesh. God has redeemed all His people, and we will rule on the earth at the end of this. We will rule with Christ 1,000 years, and then after that, the world will be given up to the Lord and made new, and then we will rule with Him in all eternity. So we see here in this passage the fact that even though we're overwhelmed for the moment, we need to look at the victories of past and present to give us peace and security and safety and comfort in the trial that we're going through, realizing that God is with us all the way. The waters saw thee. He's going to give an example here of the redemption of Jacob and Joseph from Egypt. He says, The waters saw thee, O God, the waters saw thee. They were afraid. The depths also were troubled. The clouds poured out water, the skies sent out a sound, thine arrows also went abroad. So this picture he's showing us is that when those waves were open and the Egyptians were chasing after them, not only was it just the great wind that blew open of God that blew open the pathway through the waters. Not only that, but overhead was thunder and lightning and a big hard storm. You know, a lot of times when people see the big storms and struggles in life, it causes them to seize up. But what Moses at this time said, "Hey, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." But then Christ says in this passage, even with the storm and the thunders and the opening of the waters, He says, "Don't stand still. Go forward. Don't just cause yourself to seize up because you're afraid of what might happen in the trial that you're going through. But go forward. Don't worry about the thunders and the waves and the lightning and all that stuff. Just go forward. Follow after the Lord." They had to follow after that cloud in the midst of this whole storm. They had to follow after that fire, and that fire was behind them, protecting them, and was leading them by the hand of Moses and Aaron. He says, "The clouds poured out water, the skies sent out a sound, that thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of thy thunder was in the heaven, the lightnings lighted the world, and the earth trembled and shook. Thy way is in the sea, and thy path in the great waters, and thy footsteps are not known." See, when all this was happening, they were worried. Their spirit was overwhelmed. They had to worry about the Egyptians chasing after them. The only thing that hindered the Egyptians was the pillar of fire preventing them. And then the waves open, and the thunders and lightnings over that sea, and they're like, "Hey, if we go through that, we're going to drown." And because God is protecting them from the Egyptians, there's no cloud going forward before them. They have to follow after Moses and Aaron. There will be times in your life that you don't know the direction that God wants you to go. There will be times in your life that it seems really crazy to go in a certain direction. And we just need to say, "Hey, God, in these times of struggle where I don't know what's going on, I don't know if I'm going to live or die, I'm just going to follow by the hand of God's people, by God's man, by the pastors and by the leadership. I don't know what's going on right now, but I'm going to follow and go that way because I know that God has ordained those people to lead me and to take me through. I don't know all the answers. I don't know all the situation, but I know this, that God has redeemed us, and He will have victory, and He will take the book, and then He will take the deed of this world, and He's going to have victory over the wicked. He's going to have victory, and He's going to redeem the righteous. He says, "Thy way is in the sea, and thy path in great waters, and thy footsteps are not known." See, sometimes there will be a path, and we can't see the Lord, but we just need to realize that God is telling us to go down that path. He says, "Thou leddest thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses." There, you see, when a flock is being led, the sheep don't know where they're going. They don't know what's going on. They don't know why they have to go along the path that's along the cliff or this or that or anything. But we just need to realize the shepherd is leading them to still waters. The shepherd is leading them to green pastures. But to get there, you have to go through steep valleys, the valley of shadow of death. When we go through those valleys, we just need not to learn not to fear the evil, and to rely and trust that God knows what He's doing, that His pathway is for our victory, the redemption of the righteous and the destruction of the wicked. So when we go through these trials in life, let us just realize, hey, you know, God knows what He's doing. And it's just our infirmity that gets in the way. It's just our fear of man that gets in the way. It's just our fear of not knowing, realizing that we have to go through these situations and not wanting to go through the situations. But like a humble servant just following and doing the will of the Lord and realizing that He will take care of us through the situation and bring us victory on the other end. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you, bless you, give us this, Lord. I pray that you'll continue to guide and help us to do your will, to seek after you. And Lord, I just pray that you'll help us to get to be glad in our infirmities, to realize that we aren't perfect. We can't do everything. We're not the best vessels, but Lord, I just pray that you will just be humble and to be comforted in the fact that you know what you're doing and you'll send us the victory, even though we may not know it at the time. Lord, I just pray that you'll be with us and as we go from this place. Just I pray. Amen.